The night her stepmother tore her dress in front of the entire court, Michelle thought her life was ending. She had no way of knowing that the man who came to her rescue held the key to everything her father had died trying to protect. The sound of tearing fabric cut through the ballroom. Michelle felt it before she understood it, her stepmother's hand fisted in the back of her gown, yanking hard enough to send her stumbling. The delicate seam along her shoulder gave way with a sickening rip, ivory silk splitting down her back, exposing the thin chemise beneath. Cold air kissed her bare skin. Then came the laughter. Michelle's hand flew to her shoulder, trying uselessly to hold the ruined fabric together, but the dress was destroyed. The bodice gaped, the sleeve hung limp, and she could feel the weight of 100 noble eyes on her exposed back. "How unfortunate," Lady Rhea said, her voice dripping false concern. "The fabric must have been weaker than it looked. I barely touched you." Lies. Michelle had felt the deliberate grip, the calculated pull. But who would believe the disgraced general's daughter over Lady Rhea, who smiled now with practiced sympathy while her stepdaughter stood there in tatters? "Perhaps you should retire for the evening," her stepmother continued, "before the dress falls apart entirely. How mortifying for you." Mortifying. That was the word that would follow Michelle out of this ballroom, through the palace corridors, into every piece of gossip that made its rounds tomorrow. Michelle's throat burned. She would not cry. She'd given Lady Rhea tears before, once, twice, a dozen times in the privacy of their manor, but never in public, never where it could be used as proof of weakness. She gathered the ruined fabric tighter and prepared to walk the longest walk of her life to the doors, until the crowd shifted. It wasn't a parting exactly, more like a tide pulling back from shore, instinctive and absolute. Michelle looked up through her blur of unshed tears and for a moment forgot how to breathe. He was crossing the ballroom, toward her. The Alpha King didn't attend banquets. Everyone knew this. Logan Ashland kept to the northern wing, dealt with petitions and politics, and left social pleasantries to his advisors. He certainly didn't weave through lesser nobles like a wolf through wheat, his black formal coat catching lamplight, his expression unreadable. He certainly didn't stop in front of a girl whose dress hung in tatters, whose humiliation was the evening's entertainment. Yet he did all those things. The ballroom fell into an anticipatory silence. Michelle stood frozen as Logan looked at her with eyes the color of storm clouds before lightning strikes. Up close, she could see the thin scar cutting through his left eyebrow, the way his jaw tightened as his gaze swept from her ruined shoulder to Lady Rhea's satisfied smile. Something dangerous flickered across his face. Then he turned to Lady Rhea, and when he spoke, his voice carried through the ballroom with lethal precision. "Lady Rhea," he didn't raise his voice, "I'm afraid you've made a tactical error. You see, when you destroy someone beautiful in public, people don't think less of the person you destroyed." His pause was deliberate. "They simply see you for exactly what you are, and it's not flattering." The ballroom inhaled sharply. Lady Rhea's face drained of color. Logan continued, his tone almost conversational. "Tell me, do you make a habit of assaulting young women in public? Or is it reserved only for those who can't fight back?" He tilted his head. "I ask because I'm curious whether I should have my guards escort you out now, or simply ensure you never receive another palace invitation. I'm leaning toward both." Lady Rhea opened her mouth, but no words came out. Every eye in the room was on her now, and not with sympathy. Logan didn't wait for her response. He turned back to Michelle, and his expression shifted, softened into something that made her heart stutter. He unfastened his cloak with deliberate precision, heavy black wool lined with silver, and stepped close enough that she could smell pine, smoke, and something darker, something that made her pulse jump. He swept the cloak around her shoulders, enveloping her in warmth and expensive fabric, covering every inch of ruined dress and exposed skin. His hands lingered for just a moment on her shoulders, and she felt the heat of them through the wool. "My lady," he said, his voice low and meant only for her, "would you walk with me?" Before we continue, please take 2 seconds to like this video. It tells me you want more stories like this. Michelle's voice had abandoned her entirely. She managed a nod. Logan offered his arm, and when she took it, she felt the solid strength of him, the leashed power in the way he moved. He led her through the silent ballroom, past Lady Rhea's frozen figure, past the gaping nobles, and out into the cool night air of the terrace. Only when the doors closed behind them did Michelle remember how to breathe. The terrace overlooked the palace gardens, moonlight turning the manicured hedges silver. Michelle stood at the stone railing, Logan's cloak heavy on her shoulders, and tried to process what had just happened. The Alpha King had humiliated her stepmother in front of the entire court. For her. "I'm sorry," she said finally, because she didn't know what else to say. "You didn't have to." "Don't." Logan's voice was quiet but firm. He stood beside her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him in the cool night air. "Don't apologize for her cruelty." Michelle looked at him properly for the first time. He was taller than she'd realized, broad-shouldered beneath his formal coat, but it was his face that caught her. Sharp angles softened by the moonlight, that scar through his eyebrow giving him an edge of danger. He looked like he could tear someone apart with his bare hands, yet he'd wrapped her in his cloak with a gentleness that made her chest ache. "Why did you help me?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. Logan turned to face her fully, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. "I've been watching you all evening, standing against that wall like you were trying to disappear into it, and I kept thinking—" He paused, something flickering across his face. "I kept thinking that someone who stands that still, that careful, has learned to make herself small to survive. And then I saw why." The words settled between them, uncomfortably accurate. Michelle felt exposed in a way that had nothing to do with her ruined dress. "Your stepmother is Lady Rhea Harrow," Logan said, "wife of the late General Harrow. You know about my father." Of course he did. Everyone knew about her father, the general who'd led an entire battalion to slaughter, who'd died in disgrace, leaving debts and ruin behind. "I know what people say about him." Logan's voice was careful. "I also know that stories aren't always true." Something in the way he said it made Michelle look at him sharply, but before she could ask what he meant, Logan continued. "I have a proposition for you, Michelle." The sound of her name in his mouth did something dangerous to her pulse. "Stay at the palace, as my guest." She stared at him. "I don't understand." "You don't have to." His mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Not yet, but I promise you'll be safe here, protected, and you won't have to go back to that house tonight or any night after." Michelle knew that outside of fairy tales, kings didn't offer sanctuary to girls whose fathers had betrayed the crown. "Why would you do this?" Logan stepped closer, and Michelle's back pressed against the railing. He didn't touch her, but she felt the proximity of him like a physical thing, awareness crackling between them like lightning before a storm. "Because I need your help," he said quietly. "And because when I saw you standing in that ballroom with your dress torn and your chin up, refusing to give her the satisfaction of your tears, I thought, there's someone worth knowing." Michelle's heart was doing something erratic in her chest. She should say no. Just thank him politely and walk away from whatever this was, because men like Logan didn't help people without reason, and getting tangled up with the Alpha King would only bring more trouble to her already ruined name. But then she thought of going back to Lady Rhea's house, of the small room she'd been relegated to after her father died, barely bigger than a closet, of the 1,000 small cruelties that made up her days, the way her stepmother ensured she never forgot she was there on sufferance, a burden, a reminder of debts unpaid. She thought of her late mother, who'd spent her last breath whispering, "Be brave, little star," even as fever took her at the young age of 24. "Yes," Michelle said, and watched something flash in Logan's eyes that looked almost like relief. "I'll stay." The palace room they gave her was bigger than her entire floor at Lady Rhea's manor. Michelle stood in the center of it, turning slowly, taking in the 4-poster bed with its deep blue curtains, the writing desk by the window, the wardrobe that probably cost more than everything she owned. A servant had brought her here, a kind-faced woman named Iris, who'd helped her out of the ruined dress and into a nightgown that whispered against her skin, finer than anything Michelle had ever worn. Now she was alone, Logan's cloak folded carefully on the chair, and she couldn't stop touching things. The smooth wood of the bedpost, the thick carpet under her bare feet, the glass of the window that overlooked the moonlit gardens. She'd been living in a cage so long she'd forgotten what space felt like. Sleep didn't come easily. She lay in the enormous bed, staring at the canopy above, and tried to understand what had happened. Logan's proposition played on repeat in her mind. "I need your help." Help with what? And why her, of all people? She thought of the way he'd looked at her on the terrace, that intensity in his storm-gray eyes, the way his hands had felt on her shoulders when he'd draped the cloak around her, warm and solid and careful, like she was something that might break, or something worth protecting. Michelle fell asleep with that thought, and for the first time in 3 years, she didn't dream of her father's funeral. Morning came with a knock at the door. Iris entered with a tray of breakfast, more food than Michelle usually ate in a day, and an armful of dresses. "His Majesty requested these be brought to you," Iris said, laying them across the bed. They were beautiful, each one more exquisite than the last, in shades of deep emerald and midnight blue and rich burgundy. "He said you're to choose whichever you like and meet him in the library after breakfast." Michelle's hand trembled slightly as she touched the burgundy silk. It was the color of wine, of blood, of confidence she didn't possess. "He shouldn't have... Between you and me, miss," Iris said with a conspiratorial smile. "His Majesty doesn't do things he shouldn't. If he had these sent to you, it's because he wanted to. Now eat before it gets cold, and I'll help you dress." The library was in the east wing, Iris explained as she laced Michelle into the burgundy dress. It fit perfectly, hugging her curves before flowing in soft folds to the floor. Iris pinned Michelle's dark hair up, leaving a few curls to frame her face, and when Michelle looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. She looked like she belonged here. That thought was dangerous. The library was enormous, 2 stories of books climbing toward a painted ceiling that depicted the founding of the kingdom. Logan stood by one of the tall windows, morning light turning his dark hair bronze. He'd traded his formal coat for something simpler. It made him look younger, more approachable. Then he turned and saw her, and Michelle watched something like hunger flare in his eyes. His gaze swept over her once, deliberate, and she felt suddenly, acutely aware of every place the silk touched her skin, of the way his hands flexed at his sides like he was restraining himself from reaching for her. "You look..." He stopped, cleared his throat. "The dress suits you." "Thank you for it, and for the room, and for last night." Her words came out in a rush. "I don't know how to repay. I don't want repayment." Logan crossed to her, and Michelle found herself tracking his movements like prey watching a predator. Except instead of feeling afraid, she felt awake. I want your trust, Michelle, which I know I haven't earned yet. He gestured to a table by the window where someone had laid out papers, journals, maps. Come, let me explain why you're really here. Michelle approached slowly, her eyes catching on the documents spread across the table. Military reports, supply manifests, and there, partially hidden under a map, her breath caught. Is that your father's handwriting? Yes. Logan picked up one of the journals, leather-bound and worn at the edges. I've had these in my possession for 2 years, since shortly after your father died. Michelle's hand went to her throat. How? Your father sent them to me 3 days before the battle that killed him. Logan's voice was quiet. Along with a letter saying that if anything happened to him, I was to keep these safe until the time was right. The world tilted. Michelle reached for the table edge, steadying herself. My father sent you his journals? Not all of them, just these 3. Logan laid them out carefully. They're coded. I've had my best people trying to decipher them for 2 years with limited success. But last night, when I saw you, he paused. I remembered something your father wrote in his letter. He said the only person who could truly understand his work was the one who knew him best. His daughter. Michelle stared at the journals. She recognized them, had seen her father writing in similar ones countless times, hunched over his desk in the study, his brow furrowed in concentration. He'd always been particular about his notes, meticulous to the point of obsession. Why are they coded? But even as she asked, pieces were clicking together in her mind. He was tracking something dangerous that he couldn't risk anyone else reading it. That's what I believe. Logan moved closer, and Michelle caught that scent again. Pine, smoke, and something uniquely him. And I think whatever he discovered got him killed. Not negligence on the battlefield, but murder. Deliberate and calculated. The words should have shocked her. Instead, they settled into place like a key in a lock, opening doors Michelle hadn't known were closed, because she'd never quite believed it, had she? That, her father, careful, strategic, brilliant, had simply made a catastrophic mistake. That the man who'd taught her to play chess at 6, who'd always thought 3 moves ahead, had led his men into a trap through sheer stupidity. I think someone wanted him dead and used that battle to do it. Logan's jaw tightened. And I think that same someone is now targeting me. There have been 3 attempts on my life in the past 6 months, supply lines sabotaged, battle plans leaked to our enemies. Someone in my kingdom is betraying me, and I believe your father knew who it was. Michelle looked down at the journals, her father's cramped handwriting swimming before her eyes. And you think I can decode these? I think you're the only one who can. Logan's hand came to rest on the table beside hers, not quite touching. But I won't force you. If you want to walk away, I'll understand. This is dangerous, Michelle. Whoever killed your father won't hesitate to do the same to anyone who gets too close to the truth. The smart thing, the safe thing, would be to thank him for his kindness and disappear into obscurity somewhere far from court intrigue and murdered generals and alpha kings with secrets in their eyes. But Michelle had already spent 3 years being small and scared and powerless, of believing that her father had died a failure, that his name would forever be synonymous with disgrace. Her late mother used to say that family was a promise you kept even after death, that protecting each other's names, each other's truth, mattered more than protecting yourself. Michelle had been too young to protect her father when it mattered, but maybe she wasn't too young anymore. Where do we start? she asked. The smile that crossed Logan's face was like sunrise breaking through storm clouds. Here. They worked through the morning and into the afternoon, Michelle poring over her father's journals while Logan brought her military reports, cross-referencing dates and names. The code wasn't complex once Michelle understood the pattern. Her father had used a simple substitution cipher based on chess notation, the game he'd taught her since childhood. But the contents made her blood run cold. He was tracking someone at court, Michelle said, her finger tracing a passage she'd just decoded. Someone with access to military intelligence, someone close enough to the crown to know troop movements before they happened. Logan leaned over her shoulder, close enough that she could feel his breath against her neck. The proximity should have been distracting. Instead, it felt natural, like they'd been working side by side for years instead of hours. Does he name them? Not directly, but look. Michelle flipped back several pages. He uses a symbol here and again here, always in reference to someone he calls the Serpent, someone who's been passing information to the Nordian territories for at least 5 years. 5 years. Logan's voice went hard. That predates the border conflicts. This person wasn't just betraying military intelligence, they were helping orchestrate the war. Michelle kept reading, her father's words painting a picture of patient investigation, of months spent tracking patterns and connections. He'd been building a case, careful and methodical, getting close to identifying the traitor. Too close. The last entry is 2 days before he died, Michelle said quietly. She'd found it on the final page, her father's handwriting more hurried than usual, almost frantic. He says, "I know who you are now, the serpent closest to home. I'll have proof within the week." Silence stretched between them. Logan straightened, his hand coming to rest on Michelle's shoulder, a gesture of comfort that sent heat radiating through her entire body. "He never got the chance to find that proof," Logan said. "Someone made sure of it." "Who's in your inner circle?" Michelle turned in her chair to look up at him. "Who would have had access to the same information my father did?" Logan's expression was grim. "Lord Chancellor Dorian, Master of Coin Benedict, my head of military intelligence, Commander Soren, and..." He paused. "And Lady Rhea Harrow, who served as an advisor to my father and continued in that role until 6 months ago." The name hit Michelle like a physical blow. My stepmother? She had access to everything, was present at every military council, every strategic meeting. Logan's hand tightened on her shoulder. "I removed her from her position when the leaks started escalating, told her it was a restructuring, nothing personal. She didn't take it well." Michelle's mind was racing. Lady Rhea, always so concerned with status and power. Lady Rhea, who'd married Michelle's father when he was at the height of his career. Lady Rhea, who'd been so quick to distance herself from his disgrace after his death, playing the wronged widow with practiced ease. "She would have known my father was investigating," Michelle said slowly. "If she was the traitor, she would have seen him getting close. And she would have had the means to ensure he never exposed her." Logan crouched down so they were at eye level, his hand sliding from her shoulder to cup her face with a gentleness that made her breath catch. "Michelle, if this is true, if your stepmother was responsible for your father's death, then you being here, helping me decode these journals, puts you in grave danger." Fear lived somewhere beneath her ribs, coiled tight, but looking into Logan's eyes, feeling the deliberate gentleness of his hands like she might shatter, all she could think was that she'd spent 3 years in that woman's house, had scrubbed her floors, had thanked her for the privilege of a room barely bigger than a closet. Her father's killer had made Michelle grateful for scraps. The fury that rose in her chest wasn't hot. It was ice cold and diamond sharp. "Good, let her come," Michelle said. Logan's eyes darkened with something that looked like pride, or hunger, or both. "I knew it," he said, with a smile pulling at his lips. "Knew you had teeth under all that careful politeness." "We just met yesterday," Michelle managed, though her pulse had kicked up a notch. "I know." His thumb traced her cheekbone, drifted lower to the hinge of her jaw. The touch was light enough to be accidental. "Doesn't change the fact that you're the most dangerous person I've met in years." The air went thick and close. Michelle could feel her heartbeat in her throat, and from the way Logan's gaze fixed there, intent, aware, he could hear it too, could probably sense everything. The catch in her breathing, the way her body swayed slightly toward his. Then a knock broke whatever spell they'd been under, and Logan pulled back with visible effort, his hand falling away. "Enter," he called, and Michelle mourned the loss of his touch with an intensity that should have alarmed her. Iris entered with the tea service, and behind her, a tall man in military dress. "Your Majesty, Commander Soren requests an audience." The man stepped forward, older than Logan by a decade, with iron-gray hair and a scar that ran from his temple to his jaw. His eyes went to Michelle, assessing, before returning to Logan. "Your Majesty, I apologize for the interruption, but there's been another incident." Logan's entire demeanor shifted, the softness that had been there moments ago, vanishing behind a mask of authority. "What kind of incident?" "The Northern Supply Convoy was attacked 3 days ago, the one carrying winter provisions to the border garrisons." Soren's jaw tightened. The same convoy whose route was discussed in the military council last week. No one outside that council should have known which road they'd take. Michelle watched Logan's face harden into something that reminded her why people called him the Alpha King. There was nothing gentle about him now. He was every inch the warrior ruler, dangerous and barely contained. "How many dead?" 15. Another 20 wounded. Soren's voice was clipped. "They knew exactly where to hit us, exactly when we'd be most vulnerable. This was precise intelligence, Your Majesty," someone told them. Michelle's eyes dropped to the journals spread across the table. The serpent closest to home. "Double the guard on all remaining supply lines," Logan ordered. "I want new routes planned for every convoy, and only you and I know which routes are real. Everyone else gets false information." "Including the Lord Chancellor?" "Including everyone." Logan's voice was steel. "If we have a traitor in the council, I want them isolated. No more leaks." Soren nodded and withdrew, but not before his gaze flickered once more to Michelle, curiosity evident in his expression. When the door closed, Logan let out a breath. "This is escalating. Whoever's doing this is getting bolder." Or more desperate. Michelle stood, moving, to the window. "If Lady Rhea knows I'm here, knows I'm helping you decode my father's journals, she has to realize we're getting close to exposing her. Then we need to move faster." Logan joined her at the window, and when Michelle looked up at him, she saw the weight he carried, the responsibility of a kingdom, the burden of every life lost to this hidden war. "But I won't risk you, Michelle. If this gets too dangerous. It's already dangerous." She turned to face him fully. "And I'm not leaving. My father died trying to expose this traitor. I won't let that be for nothing." Logan looked at her like he was seeing someone entirely new. "You're sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything." The truth was, Michelle had spent the years after her father's death drifting through life like a ghost, surviving, but not living. But standing here with her father's journals spread before her and Logan's steady presence at her back, something long dormant stirred to life. Not hope, something with sharper edges. Even if it killed her, she was done being a ghost in her own life. "Then we work together," Logan said, and extended his hand. Michelle took it, and the contact sparked through her like a lit fuse. His hand was warm, calloused, and when his fingers closed around hers, she forgot how to breathe properly. A partnership, she told herself. An alliance. But the way he was looking at her, the way his thumb traced a slow circle against her palm before he let go, that felt like more than an alliance, something far more dangerous. They fell into a rhythm over the following days. Mornings in the library, working through her father's journals, slowly building a picture of the conspiracy that had gotten him killed. Afternoons, Logan would be called away to his duties, counsels and petitions and the endless demands of ruling, and Michelle would continue decoding alone, making notes, cross-referencing. Evenings, he would find her again, and they would walk the palace, gardens as the sun set, ostensibly discussing their findings, but more often simply talking. Michelle learned that Logan had become king at 19 when his father died suddenly, that he'd never wanted the throne, but had taken it because duty demanded it, that he had a sister who'd died young, and the grief of it still haunted him. Logan, in turn, coaxed stories from Michelle that she had never told anyone, about her father, who he'd been before disgrace had rewritten his memory, about her mother, who died when Michelle was 8, leaving her with only fragmented memories of warmth and laughter, about the loneliness of living in Lady Rhea's house, being tolerated but never wanted. "You deserved better," Logan said one evening as they sat by the fountain in the garden's heart. The water sparkled in the dying light, and his profile was all sharp angles and shadows. "I survived. That's what matters." "No." He turned to look at her, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. "You did more than survive. You stayed kind. That takes strength most people don't have." Michelle didn't know what to say to that, so instead, she did what she'd been wanting to do for days. She reached out and traced the scar through his eyebrow with a gentle finger. Logan went very still. "How did you get this?" she asked softly. "A fight when I was 16. Another boy said something about my sister." His voice was rough. "I broke his nose. He got in one good hit before I did. You defended her. She was already dead, but I couldn't let it go." His hand came up to catch hers, holding it against his face. "Sometimes I wonder if that's all I know how to do. Fight. Defend. It's what I was raised for. There's more to you than that." Michelle could feel his pulse under her fingertips, steady and strong. "You're kind when you don't have to be. You gave me sanctuary when you could have just walked away. You could have sent your people to decode my father's journals, but you involved me because you knew I wanted to be part of this. I involved you because I wanted you near me." The confession hung between them, raw and honest. Michelle's heart was pounding so hard, she was certain he could hear it. He probably could hear it, with those wolf senses she kept forgetting about. She'd been thinking about this. That was the shameful truth she'd been trying not to examine too closely. Lying awake in the dark, she'd replayed every touch. His hand steadying her elbow, his fingers brushing hers when he passed her documents, the way he'd adjusted his cloak around her shoulders that first night like she was something precious. She'd imagined what it would be like if he touched her without an excuse, if he pulled her close and kissed her like he'd been thinking about it too. Then she'd felt guilty for wanting it, for wanting him, when her father's murderer was still breathing, when she should be focused on justice, not on the way Logan's mouth curved when he looked at her. "Logan, I know this is fast. He shifted closer, his free hand coming up to cup her face. I know we barely know each other, but Michelle, when I look at you, when I'm with you. He stopped, searching for words. I feel like I can breathe for the first time in years. The ache in her chest bloomed. She'd long forgotten what it felt like to be seen as something other than a burden, an inconvenience, a charity case to be endured. I'm terrified, she admitted, and her voice cracked. That you'll wake up one day and realize that I'm just some girl whose father died badly, who doesn't know how to be anything except small and quiet and— Stop. The command in his voice made her fall silent. Michelle, you're brilliant and brave and so goddamn strong it makes me ache watching you pretend you're not. A sound escaped her throat, half laugh, half sob. I don't know how to want this, she whispered. Don't know how to let myself have something good without waiting for it to be taken away. Logan's thumb caught the tear that had escaped down her cheek. Then let me teach you, he said quietly. Let me prove that I'm not going anywhere. Michelle looked up at him, at the tension in his shoulders, the way his hand trembled slightly against her face, the naked want in his eyes that he wasn't even trying to hide anymore. He was holding himself back, waiting for her permission, giving her the choice even though she could see how much it cost him. Kiss me, she whispered. Please, before I lose my nerve. Logan's eyes darkened, and then his mouth was on hers, and Michelle's entire world narrowed to the point of contact. He kissed like he did everything, with complete focus, with intensity that stole her breath. His hand slid into her hair, tilting her head to deepen the kiss, and Michelle pressed closer, her fingers curling into his shirt. It was nothing like the chaste kisses she'd received from hopeful suitors before her father's disgrace. This was heat and hunger and something almost desperate, like Logan was trying to memorize her with his mouth. When he finally pulled back, they were both breathing hard. I've wanted to do that since I saw you on that terrace, he said against her lips. You should have done it sooner. His laugh was low and rough. We should go inside, before I do something inadvisable in the palace gardens. Michelle's body was singing with awareness, with want. What if I want you to do something inadvisable? Logan's expression went molten. Michelle, I know we should be cautious. She pulled back enough to meet his eyes. But if there's one thing I'm learning, it's that life is uncertain. Tomorrow isn't guaranteed, and I don't want to waste whatever time we have being careful. For a long moment, Logan just looked at her, conflict clear on his face. Then he stood and offered his hand. Come with me. He led her through the palace corridors, not to her room or his, but to a tower in the eastern wing, up, stone steps worn smooth by centuries of feet, until they emerged onto a parapet that overlooked the entire kingdom. The city spread below them, lights beginning to wink on as darkness fell, and beyond that, the forest stretched toward mountains purple in the distance. This is where I come when I need to remember why I do this, Logan said, leaning against the stone wall. All those people down there, going about their lives, falling in love, fighting, making mistakes, being human. They depend on me to keep them safe, and He stopped. Sometimes the weight of it feels crushing. Michelle moved to stand beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. You don't have to carry it alone. Don't I? He looked down at her. I'm the Alpha King. Alone is what I am. Not anymore. She reached for his hand, threading their fingers together. I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere either. Logan brought their joined hands to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that felt like a promise. You terrify me, you know? This, whatever this is between us, it's the most dangerous thing I've ever done. More dangerous than hunting traitors? Infinitely. His voice was rough with honesty. Because I could lose you, and I've already lost enough. Michelle understood. She'd lost enough too. Her mother, her father, 3 years of her life to Lady Rhea's cruelty. The thought of opening herself up to more loss, more pain, should have sent her running. But looking at Logan, feeling the solid warmth of his hand in hers, all she wanted was to move closer. Then I guess we'll have to make sure we both survive, she said. Logan pulled her into his arms, and Michelle went willingly, tucking her face against his chest. She could hear his heartbeat, strong and steady, feel the rise and fall of his breathing. They stood like that as the stars came out, two people who'd found each other in the darkness, neither quite ready to let go. The next morning brought another breakthrough. In the journals, Michelle had been working through a particularly dense section of coded text when the pattern finally clicked. Her father had been tracking financial transactions, large sums of money moving through accounts connected to someone at court. "Look at this," she said when Logan arrived at the library. "My father tracked payments going back 7 years, all to the same source, a merchant house in the Nordian territories. Someone at court was being paid to leak information." Logan studied the pages, his expression darkening. "Can you trace who was receiving the payments?" "Not directly, but look at the timing." Michelle pointed to a series of dates. "Every payment corresponds to a major military decision. This one here, 2 weeks before the Battle of Thornwood Pass. This one, right after the peace treaty negotiations fell apart. Someone was being paid to ensure the negotiations failed." Logan's jaw tightened. "To keep the war going. And this one." Michelle's finger hovered over the final entry, dated 3 days before her father's death. "This is the largest payment yet, and my father wrote one word next to it. Confirmed. He'd identified the traitor? And they killed him for it." Michelle's voice was steady, but her hands trembled. Logan's hand covered hers. "We'll prove it. We'll expose her, Michelle. Your father will have justice." "It's not just about justice." She looked up at him. "It's about stopping her before she gets you killed too." The thought had been circling Michelle's mind for days now, growing sharper each time. As Logan dug deeper, every instinct she had was screaming that history was about to repeat itself. Her father had gotten close to the truth. Her father had died. Logan was getting close to the truth. And Michelle was walking around with this sick certainty that she was about to watch it happen again, was going to lose someone else she cared about because she'd been too weak to stop it. The protectiveness in her voice made Logan's expression soften. "Are you worried about me?" "I'm terrified for you." The admission came easier than it should have. "Logan, if something happened to you..." He kissed her before she could finish, fierce and desperate, his mouth claiming hers like he could kiss away her fear. His hand slid into her hair, fingers tangling at the nape of her neck, and when his tongue swept against the seam of her lips, Michelle opened for him without thinking. The kiss deepened, turned searching. He tasted like desperation and promise, and she felt herself melting into him, her hands fisting in his shirt, her body arching closer. His tongue stroked against hers, slow and deliberate now, and the intimacy of it made her chest ache almost as much as it made heat coil low in her belly. When he finally pulled back, they were both breathing hard, his forehead pressed to hers. His thumb traced her kiss-swollen bottom lip, and his eyes had gone dark. "Nothing's going to happen to me," he whispered against her mouth. "Not with you watching my back." Michelle wanted to believe him, but that afternoon, everything changed. She was in the library alone, Logan having been called to an emergency council meeting when Iris came rushing in, her face pale. "Miss, you need to come quickly. There's been an accident." Michelle's heart stopped. What kind of accident? His Majesty, he was reviewing the eastern wall fortifications when part of the scaffolding collapsed. Iris was already pulling Michelle toward the door. "They've taken him to his chambers. The healers are with him." The walk to Logan's rooms was the longest of Michelle's life. Iris led her through corridors that seemed to stretch forever, past guards whose expressions were grim, until finally they reached the royal wing. Logan's door was guarded by Commander Soren, who looked up sharply at their approach. "Miss Harrow, the healers said no visitors." "Let her through," came Logan's voice from inside, strained, but alive, and Michelle could have wept with relief. Soren stepped aside, and Michelle entered to find Logan sitting on the edge of his bed, his shirt discarded, while a healer wrapped his ribs. His face was scraped, bruising already forming along his jaw, but he was breathing. "You're hurt." Michelle crossed to him before she could think better of it, her hands hovering over his injuries, afraid to touch and cause more pain. "I'm fine." Logan caught one of her hands, pressing it to his uninjured cheek. "Bruised ribs, some scrapes. I've had worse." "The scaffolding shouldn't have collapsed," the healer said grimly, tying off the bandage. "That section was inspected just yesterday. Someone tampered with the supports." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Michelle felt Logan's hand tighten on hers. "How certain are you?" Logan asked. "The supports were cut 3/4 through, then disguised. It was meant to look like an accident, but it was deliberate." The healer stood, gathering his supplies. After the healer left, Michelle sank down on the bed beside Logan, careful not to jostle him. Her hands were shaking, the reality of how close she'd come to losing him settling like ice in her chest. "This is because of the journals," she said, "because we're getting close." "Probably." Logan shifted to face her, wincing at the movement. "Which means we're right. The traitor is feeling cornered." "Logan, you could have died." Her voice cracked despite her best efforts. "If the scaffolding had collapsed differently, if you'd been standing a foot to the left." He pulled her against him, his arms coming around her despite the obvious pain it caused. "But I didn't. I'm right here." Michelle buried her face in his neck, breathing him in, pine and smoke and the copper tang of blood. She'd known him less than a week. It shouldn't be possible to feel this deeply for someone in such a short time. But the thought of a world without him in it was unbearable. "We need to end this," she said against his skin, "before they succeed." "Agreed." Logan's hand stroked through her hair. "But carefully. If we move too soon, without proof, the traitor will disappear. We need to draw them out." Michelle pulled back enough to look at him. "How?" "By making them think we know more than we do." Logan's expression was calculating despite the pain etched around his eyes. "Tomorrow night, there's a dinner with the council. All the suspects will be there. Dorian, Benedict, Soren, and I'll ensure Lady Rhea receives an invitation. We'll let slip that you've decoded the final journal, that we know the traitor's identity." "And see who panics?" "Exactly." His thumb traced her cheekbone. "But it will put you at risk, Michelle. If Lady Rhea is the traitor, she won't hesitate to move against you." "Let her try." Michelle's voice was steel. "I want to look her in the eye when we expose her." Logan studied her face, and whatever he saw there made him smile despite the circumstances. "Remind me never to underestimate you." "You better not." She leaned in and kissed him softly, carefully, mindful of his injuries. Now rest. You'll need your strength tomorrow. Stay with me tonight?" The request was quiet, almost vulnerable. Michelle wanted to maintain some semblance of propriety, but instead she found herself kicking off her shoes and settling beside him on the bed, letting him pull her close. They lay together as the afternoon faded into evening, Logan's breathing gradually evening out into sleep, and Michelle keeping watch like she could protect him from the darkness through sheer force of will. The dinner the next evening was an intimate affair, just the council members and select guests in one of the palace's smaller dining rooms. Michelle wore a dress of deep sapphire that Iris had helped her into, her hair arranged in an elaborate style that made her look older, more sophisticated, like someone who belonged at the Alpha King's table. Lady Rhea arrived fashionably late, her expression carefully neutral when she saw Michelle seated at Logan's right hand. But Michelle caught the flash of something in her stepmother's eyes. Calculation, perhaps, or concern. Lord Chancellor Dorian was a portly man with kind eyes and a politician's smile. Benedict, the master of coin, was thin and nervous, his fingers constantly fidgeting with his cutlery. Commander Soren sat across from Michelle, his military bearing evident even at rest. Any one of them could be the traitor. But Michelle's money was on the woman who'd raised her, who'd made her life a calculated misery for 3 years. Logan stood to offer a toast, and Michelle saw him wince slightly as he raised his glass. To trusted advisors and new friends, may we always know which is which. The words landed like stones in still water. Michelle watched the reactions, Dorian's puzzled frown, Benedict's nervous laugh, Soren's sharp attention, and Lady Rhea, whose smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Throughout dinner, Logan played his part perfectly, making casual references to the journals, to decoded passages, to information they'd supposedly uncovered. Michelle added her own comments, watching Lady Rhea's face for any sign of recognition. "My father was meticulous in his record-keeping," Michelle said during the main course, her voice carrying across the table. "Every transaction, every meeting, every suspicion, he wrote it all down, even the things he couldn't prove at the time." Lady Rhea's wineglass paused halfway to her lips. "How fascinating. I didn't realize the general kept such detailed records." "He did." Michelle met her stepmother's eyes steadily. Especially in those final weeks, he was building a case against someone he'd trusted for years. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Logan's hand found Michelle's under the table, squeezing gently. "Well," Dorian said into the silence, "I'm sure whatever the general discovered will prove valuable to His Majesty's investigations. If there truly is a traitor in our midst, they should be rooted out with all haste." "Agreed," Benedict added nervously. "The very idea that someone we've worked alongside could be betraying us, it's unconscionable." Soren said nothing, but his eyes moved between Logan and Michelle with sharp intelligence. After dinner, the group moved to an adjoining sitting room for wine and conversation. Michelle found herself cornered by Lady Rhea near the fireplace, her stepmother's smile sharp as broken glass. "You've landed on your feet, haven't you?" Lady Rhea's voice was low enough that no one else could hear. "From my charity case to the king's—" "What, exactly? Pet? Paramour?" "Careful," Michelle said softly. "Your jealousy is showing." "Jealous?" Lady Rhea laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Of you? My dear stepdaughter, you have no idea what you've walked into." Michelle stepped closer. "I know more than you think, Rhea. My father made sure of it." For just a moment, Lady Rhea's mask slipped, and Michelle saw genuine fear flash across her face. Then it was gone, replaced by cold calculation. "Your father was a fool who got himself killed. I'd hate to see you follow in his footsteps." The threat was clear. Michelle felt her pulse jump, but kept her voice steady. Is that what happened? He got himself killed? Or did someone help him along? Lady Rhea's eyes narrowed. Be very careful, Michelle. You're playing a dangerous game. So are you. They stared at each other, years of resentment and suspicion finally surfacing. Then Logan was there, his hand settling on Michelle's lower back with possessive warmth. Lady Rhea, he said pleasantly, I hope you're not harassing my guest again. Not at all, Your Majesty. Lady Rhea's smile was back in place, simply reminiscing about old times. How lovely. Michelle, would you take some air with me? I find I'm in need of fresh perspective. Logan guided her toward the terrace, doors, and she felt Lady Rhea's gaze burning into her back. Once outside, he pulled her into the shadows beside the door, keeping his voice low. Did she threaten you? Yes. Michelle was still shaking with adrenaline. Logan, she knows. She knows we're close to exposing her. Good. That means she'll make a move soon. His hands came up to frame her face. But I need you to promise me something. Promise me you won't go anywhere alone, not until this is over. I promise. And promise me. He stopped, something vulnerable crossing his face. Promise me you'll be careful, because He swallowed. Michelle, if something happened to you. He stopped, his jaw working like he was trying to hold the words back, but his hands were trembling against her face, giving him away. I've given orders that led men to their deaths, he said finally, quiet and devastated. I've watched my father die in my arms, held my sister as she took her last breath. I've made impossible choices and lived with the consequences of every loss. But the thought of losing you, his eyes closed briefly, it terrifies me in a way nothing else has, because even if I can survive it, I don't know if I want to. Michelle's breath caught. She'd never seen him like this, stripped of that careful control, raw and honest, and so clearly afraid it made her own fear seem small in comparison. I should send you away, he continued, opening his eyes to look at her. Somewhere far from court, somewhere they can't reach you. It's the smart thing to do. His thumb brushed across her cheekbone. But I'm not strong enough to do it. I need you here, where I can see you, where I know you're... His voice cracked. Selfish man that I am, I can't let you go. Good, Michelle whispered, because I'm not going anywhere. Michelle? No. She pressed her fingers to his lips. You don't get to protect me by pushing me away. We're in this together. That's what partnership means. She kissed him then, pouring everything she couldn't say into the press of her lips against his. When she pulled back, his eyes were dark with emotion. I feel it too, she whispered. They stood together in the shadows, holding each other, neither ready to speak the words that hovered between them. Love was too big, too terrifying, too real. But Michelle felt it anyway, settling into her bones like certainty. Tomorrow they would spring their trap. Tomorrow they would catch a traitor and vindicate her father's memory. But tonight, she had this. Logan's arms around her, his heart beating against hers, the promise of something that might survive the coming storm. Michelle woke in the deep hours of the night to the sound of someone in her room. She'd returned to her own chambers after the dinner, Logan insisting she needed proper rest, even though both of them had wanted her to stay. Now she lay frozen in bed, her heart hammering as she tried to locate the intruder in the darkness. A shadow moved near her, wardrobe, then a second near the window. She counted, not one intruder, but two. Michelle's mind raced. She could scream, but would the guards hear her in time? She could try to run, but they were between her and the door. She could... The shadow near the window moved toward the bed, and Michelle saw the glint of steel in the moonlight. She rolled sideways just as the blade came down, embedding itself in the pillow where her head had been. Michelle hit the floor hard, her nightgown tangling around her legs as she scrambled toward the door. But the second intruder was faster, grabbing her around the waist and clamping a hand over her mouth. Michelle bit down hard, tasting blood, and her attacker cursed. His grip loosened just enough for her to twist free, her hand closing around the heavy candle holder on her bedside table. She swung it with all her strength, connecting with something that gave a satisfying crunch. The first attacker was coming at her again, knife raised. Michelle threw the candle holder at his face and lunged for the door, screaming as loud as she could. She wrenched the door open and nearly collided with Logan, who was running down the corridor with Soren and half a dozen guards behind him. He took one look at her, wild-eyed and bloodied, her nightgown torn, and something murderous crossed his face. "Stay with her," he ordered Soren, and then he was pushing past Michelle into her room. The sounds of the fight were brutal and brief. When Logan emerged, his knuckles were bloody, and there was a coldness to his expression that made Michelle's breath catch. Behind him, guards dragged out two men, one with a broken nose courtesy of Michelle's candle holder, the other barely conscious. "Take them to the dungeons," Logan said. "I'll question them myself." Then he was gathering Michelle into his arms, and she was shaking so hard her teeth chattered. He carried her to his own chambers, Soren following with drawn sword, and didn't put her down until they were safely inside with guards posted at every entrance. "You're bleeding," Logan said roughly, his hands running over her, checking for injuries. "It's not my blood. I bit him." Michelle tried for a smile, but it came out shaky. "I remembered what you said about fighting back." "Christ, Michelle." He pulled her against him, so tight she could barely breathe. "When I heard you scream..." "I'm okay." She held him just as tightly, feeling the tremor in his muscles. "They didn't get to me. This time." Logan pulled back enough to look at her. "But they'll try again. Whoever sent them isn't going to stop. Then we end it. Tonight." Michelle's voice was steadier than she felt. "Question those men. Figure out who hired them." Logan nodded slowly. "You stay here, with Soren and a full guard." It wasn't a request. His arms tightened around her, like he was physically bracing himself to let go. When he finally pulled back, his hands lingered on her face, her shoulders reluctant to break contact. "I'll find out who sent them." He kissed her once more, longer than necessary, fierce and possessive, his forehead resting against hers for a breath, 2 breaths, before he forced himself to step away. The look he gave her as he reached the door was pure anguish, a man torn between duty and the overwhelming need to stay. Michelle paced Logan's chambers for what felt like hours, Soren watching her with patient eyes from his post by the door. She'd changed into a simple dress Iris had brought, washed the blood from her hands, but she couldn't stop replaying the attack in her mind. They'd been waiting for her, had known which room was hers, had come prepared to kill her in her sleep. Lady Rhea. It had to be Lady Rhea. Finally, as dawn was breaking, Logan returned. His face was grim, his jaw tight, and Michelle knew before he spoke what he'd learned. "They talked?" she asked. "Eventually." Logan's voice was flat. "They were hired 3 days ago by someone who wore a hooded cloak and paid in gold, but one of them saw a ring on the employer's hand, a distinctive piece with a serpent wrapped around a ruby." Michelle's breath stopped. "My father gave Lady Rhea that ring when they married. It was his mother's." "I know. I've seen her wear it." Logan crossed to Michelle, his hands settling on her shoulders. "We have enough to arrest her, Michelle. Those men will testify, combined with what we've decoded from the journals. We can prove she's the traitor." Then let's do it now. There's something else. Logan's expression was troubled. The men said they were told to make it look like a robbery gone wrong. But if that failed, if you survived, they were to leave something behind. A message. He handed her a piece of parchment. Michelle unfolded it with shaking hands and read the words written in an elegant script she knew well. The sins of the father fall upon the child. Your father should have known better than to threaten a serpent. She's confessing, Michelle whispered. She knows we're going to catch her, so she's trying to terrify me first? Or trying to draw you out, make you reckless? Logan took the note from her hands, and Michelle watched his expression darken into something savage. I could go to her right now, make her answer for what she's done to you, what she did to your father. Logan, no. Michelle caught his arm, feeling the tension coiled in his muscles. That's exactly what she wants, for you to come at her in anger, without proof, so she can claim persecution or slip away in the chaos. She tried to have you killed. His voice was raw. She's terrorized you for 3 years, and before that, she murdered your father. I don't care about proof right now. I want her to pay. And she will. Michelle stepped in front of him, forcing him to look at her. But we do this right, with witnesses, with evidence, with the full weight of the law. We make it so airtight she can't wriggle free, so everyone knows exactly what she is. Logan looked torn between the need for vengeance and the logic of her words. His hand came up to cup her face, and she could see the struggle in his eyes. I want her destroyed for what she's done to you, he said quietly. Then help me destroy her properly. Michelle covered his hand with hers. When? He took a breath, visibly forcing himself to calm. This morning, I'll call an emergency council session. Logan pulled her close, his arms tight around her. It's going to be over soon, Michelle. I promise. She leaned into him, drawing strength from his solid presence. And after, when this is done? After, Logan said softly, his lips brushing her temple. We figure out what this is between us, without the shadow of conspiracy and murder hanging over our heads. I'd like that. They stood together as the sun rose, and Michelle tried to imagine a future where she didn't have to look over her shoulder, where she could simply be with Logan without the weight of investigation and danger pressing down on them, where they could explore these feelings that had grown so fast and so fierce between them. It seemed impossible, but then again, a week ago, she'd been a disgraced noble's daughter with no prospects and no hope. Now she was standing in the Alpha King's arms, about to expose a traitor and reclaim her father's honor. Impossible things happened every day, though as Michelle pressed closer to Logan's warmth, she couldn't quite shake the feeling that maybe they were missing something. The serpent closest to home, her father had written. But what if Lady Rhea wasn't the serpent? What if she was just the fangs, and the true serpent still coiled in the shadows, watching, waiting? She pushed the thought away. The council chamber was full when they entered, not just the usual advisors, but every lord and lady of consequence in the capital, summoned by royal decree. Lady Rhea sat near the front, her face carefully neutral, but Michelle saw the tension in her shoulders. She knew. She had to know. Logan took his seat at the head of the table, and Michelle stood beside him, exactly where she belonged. Commander Soren flanked them from the other side, and guards lined every wall. Thank you all for coming on such short notice, Logan began, his voice carrying through the chamber. I've called you here to address a matter of utmost gravity. For the past several years, someone in this court has been committing treason, selling military intelligence to our enemies, orchestrating the deaths of our soldiers, and working to undermine the stability of this kingdom. The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Logan waited for silence before continuing. Recently, evidence has come to light that identifies this traitor, evidence painstakingly compiled by General Harrow before his death, evidence that got him killed for getting too close to the truth. Michelle watched Lady Rhea's face, still neutral, but a muscle twitched in her jaw. "Miss Harrow," Logan said, turning to Michelle, "would you present your findings?" Michelle stepped forward, her father's journals in her hands. Her voice was steady as she began to speak. "My father spent the last months of his life tracking down a sinister truth. He documented everything: financial transactions, leaked intelligence, suspicious patterns. He encoded it all in these journals, which he sent to His Majesty 3 days before his death." She opened the first journal, showing the decoded passages. "The evidence shows that someone at court received substantial payments from Nordian sources over a period of 7 years. These payments correspond exactly with major intelligence leaks and military setbacks. My father traced the money through 3 different merchant houses before identifying its final destination." Michelle's eyes found Lady Rhea's. "A private account held by Lady Rhea Harrow." The room exploded, lords and ladies shouting over each other, guards moving to block the exits. But Michelle kept her gaze locked on her stepmother, watching the mask finally, completely shatter. Lady Rhea stood slowly, and when she spoke, her voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "Clever girl. Your father would be proud." She smiled, and it was a terrible sight. He was clever too clever for his own good. "You admit it?" Dorian's voice was shocked. "You're confessing to treason?" "I'm admitting to survival." Lady Rhea's gaze swept the room. This kingdom was dying, rotting from the inside with corruption and weak leadership. The Nordians offered something better: order, strength, power. I simply chose the winning side. "You chose gold," Logan said coldly, "and you killed a good man to protect your secrets." "I killed a threat." Lady Rhea's attention snapped back to Michelle. "Your father was going to expose me, destroy everything I'd built, so I ensured he died a disgrace, his reputation in tatters, his name synonymous with failure, and I kept you close. His broken little daughter as insurance. As long as you were powerless and pitiful, you'd never think to question the official story." The words landed like physical blows, but Michelle refused to flinch. "You miscalculated." "Apparently." Lady Rhea's smile was sharp. "But then, I didn't anticipate you'd capture the king's interest. That was unfortunate." "For you." Logan stood, and the authority in his movement made everyone in the room fall silent. "Lady Rhea Harrow, I charge you with high treason, conspiracy to commit murder, and crimes against the crown. Commander Soren, place her under arrest." Soren moved forward, but Lady Rhea wasn't done. "You think this ends with me?" She laughed, high and brittle. "I'm not the serpent, children. I'm just one head. The real power, the ones who truly pull the strings, they'll come for you both. And when they do, you'll wish you'd let me finish what I started." "Then let them come." Logan's voice was steel. "We'll be ready." Guards surrounded Lady Rhea, and for just a moment, she looked at Michelle with something that might have been begrudging respect. "You're stronger than your father," she said quietly. "He hesitated at the end, wondered if exposing me was worth the cost. But you—" She shook her head. "You're relentless. That might actually keep you alive." Then she was gone, dragged away to the dungeons, and the council chamber dissolved into chaos once more. Michelle stood in the center of it all, feeling oddly hollow. It was done. Her father was vindicated, Lady Rhea would face justice. Everything she'd been fighting for had been achieved. So why did she feel like this was just the beginning? Logan's hand found hers, warm and solid and real. When she looked up at him, she saw the same understanding in his eyes. "What she said about others," Michelle murmured. "You think she was telling the truth?" "I think we'll find out." Logan pulled her closer, heedless of the watching crowd. "But whatever comes, we face it together." The next days were a blur of formal proceedings and investigations. Lady Rhea's co-conspirators were rooted out, 3 other nobles who'd been taking Nordian gold, plus a handful of servants who'd been passing information. The web of conspiracy was wider than anyone had realized, but with Lady Rhea's arrest, it began to unravel. Michelle's father was posthumously cleared of all charges, his military honors restored, his name spoken with respect instead of scorn. A memorial was planned, and Michelle found herself crying for the first time in years, not from grief, but from relief, from vindication, from the weight of 3 years of shame finally lifting from her shoulders. Through it all, Logan was there. Not just as the Alpha King conducting investigations, but as the man who'd somehow become essential to her in less than 2 weeks. They stole moments between meetings, walks in the garden at twilight, quiet dinners where they talked about their days. And late at night, when the palace was sleeping, he would come to her room, or she to his, and they would lie together in the darkness, not quite ready to cross the final line, but unable to stay apart. "I need to tell you something," Logan said one night as they lay tangled together in his bed, clothed but intimate in a way that made Michelle's heart ache. "Something I should have told you before, but I was afraid." Michelle propped herself up on one elbow, studying his face in the firelight. "What is it?" "I didn't just bring you to the palace because of the journals." His hand came up to cup her face, thumb stroking her cheekbone. "I'd been watching you for months, Michelle. At court events, in the city. I kept seeing you with Lady Rhea, seeing how she treated you, and I kept thinking I should intervene. But I couldn't. Not without cause. Lady Rhea was still an advisor then, still trusted. If I'd moved against her, it would have looked like royal overreach, or worse. It could have put you in more danger. The journals gave you a legitimate reason." "Yes, but even if they hadn't existed, I think I would have found a way." His eyes were intense on hers. "Because from the first time I saw you, months before that banquet, I felt something shift inside me, like recognition, like inevitability." Michelle's breath caught. "Logan, I'm trying to tell you that I'm in love with you." The words were quiet but certain. "I know it's too soon. I know we barely know each other. But I'm in love with you, Michelle. With your strength and your courage and the way you refuse to let your stepmother break you. With everything you are." Tears pricked Michelle's eyes. "I love you too. You gave me back something I didn't even know I'd lost. The belief that I deserved to take up space in the world." Logan pulled her down for a kiss that was different from all the others. Slower, deeper, weighted with promise. When he rolled her beneath him, his body settling between her thighs, Michelle felt the last of her reservations burn away. "Stay with me," he murmured against her lips. "Not as my guest, not as an investigator. Stay with me as mine." "Yes." The word was barely a breath. "Yes, Logan. I'm yours." His hands found the laces of her nightgown, and Michelle arched into his touch, years of numbness giving way to feeling, to want, to a need so fierce it obliterated thought. They came together slowly, carefully, Logan treating her like she was precious, like she might shatter. "You don't need to be gentle with me," Michelle whispered against his mouth, her nails dragging down his back in a way that made him groan. Something ignited in Logan's eyes, heat and possession, and barely leashed control finally slipping. "Tell me if it's too much." Her legs wrapped around his waist, pulling him closer. "I want all of you, Logan. No holding back." And when he finally took her at her word, when he slid home with a force that stole her breath, Michelle gasped at the perfection of it. Not careful or cautious, but claiming, consuming, like he'd been restraining himself, and she'd finally set him free. They moved together in the firelight, urgent and desperate, whispered words turning to gasped pleas and breathless demands, and when Michelle came apart in his arms, she felt like she was being unmade and remade all at once. When Logan followed her over the edge with her name torn from his lips, she held him through it, anchor and haven both, feeling the tremors that racked his body as he buried his face in her neck. Afterward, they lay tangled together, sweat-slicked and sated, and Michelle had never felt more alive. "I want forever with you," Logan said into her hair. "I want to make you my queen. I want everyone to know you're mine, and I'm yours." "Forever sounds perfect," Michelle whispered, "but right now, I'll take tonight." "Tonight," Logan agreed, "and tomorrow, and every day after that." The formal announcement came a week later. Logan stood before the full court with Michelle at his side and declared his intention to take her as his mate and future queen. There were some who objected, nobles who thought a formerly disgraced general's daughter unworthy of the crown, but Logan silenced them with a look that reminded everyone why he was the Alpha King. Lady Rhea, imprisoned in the palace dungeons awaiting trial, reportedly laughed when she heard the news. Her trial was set for the following month, and Michelle knew she would have to face her stepmother one final time, would have to testify about everything she'd endured. But that was a problem for future Michelle. Tonight, standing in the ballroom where this had all begun, wearing a gown of midnight blue with Logan's cloak pinned at her shoulder like a declaration, Michelle felt only triumph. The same nobles who'd laughed when her dress was torn now bowed to her. The same court that had whispered about her disgrace now celebrated her elevation. Logan claimed her for a dance then, sweeping her onto the floor as the musicians played. They moved together perfectly, Michelle's body fitting against his like they'd been dancing together for years. "Happy?" he asked, spinning her. "Deliriously." Michelle laughed, feeling light and free and more herself than she'd been in years. "Though I keep waiting for something to go wrong." "Nothing's going wrong." Logan pulled her closer. "I won't let it." But even as he spoke, Michelle caught sight of a figure at the edge of the ballroom, a hooded stranger whose presence felt wrong, whose stillness seemed predatory. When she blinked, they were gone, and she told herself she'd imagined it. Logan was spinning her, the musicians were playing, and Michelle decided that whatever threats lurked in the shadows could wait. Tonight was for celebration. Tonight was for joy. Tonight, she would dance with the man she loved, wrapped in his cloak, safe in his arms, and trust that together they could face anything. The future was uncertain, but it was theirs. And that, Michelle thought as Logan kissed her in front of the entire court, was more than enough. Where are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. I love hearing your thoughts, and if you'd like to support me, please subscribe. It's free, and it helps more people hear these stories.